As you probably already know, Mario Party Superstars has remade 5 boards from previous Mario Party games, and when it comes to those remakes, I think most of them are pretty solid. Yoshi's Tropical Island and Peach's Birthday Cake from Mario Party 1 improved many aspects that are either flawed or needed a bit better execution in the original versions. Yoshi's Tropical Island has an item shop, and while all of the other boards have them, it really makes a difference on Yoshi's Tropical Island specifically due to how you can plan out strategies with some of the movement-based items. And Peach's Birthday Cake went from a board that I didn't really like originally to a much more improved version due to how it fleshed out so many aspects of the original. Mario Party 3's Woody Woods is also an improvement to the original. Granted, it's not that big of an improvement, but I still think it's better than the original because of the changed direction of the skeleton key gates. It was really odd that one of the skeleton key gates in the original board takes you away from Boo, and so I'm glad this version fixes that problem. The board also looks a lot better here than it did in 3. I really like the changes in elevation that the board has in this version, as well as the fact that they removed the boring white paths. However, if there was one game that they kind of flubbed the board representation of, it was Mario Party 2, as I think both boards taken from that game are noticeably weaker than the originals, at least in my opinion. Superstars' version of Spaceland changed the Snippet Patrol so that it takes you back to one of the corners of the map, rather than just leaving you on one of the paths that take you to the center. This means that you have to retread noticeably more ground than in the original game, which feels a bit more cumbersome. Also, I kinda don't like how in this version of the board, Bowser fires his beam even if no one is in its path, which... why would you take away a convenience feature that was in the original game? Doesn't really make much sense. However, even with these downgrades, I can still say that I enjoy playing on Spaceland. I don't think the changes are truly enough to make it unenjoyable. Superstars makes it so that you can have 3 items at a time instead of 1 like in the original game, meaning that you can stock up on a lot of movement-based items to circumvent these issues for the most part. Plus, I still really like the theming, and they still didn't really ruin anything gameplay-wise with the Bowser beam. Oh no. When it comes to board downgrades in this game, one board had it much worse compared to Spaceland, which happens to be the other board they brought back from 2. And seeing as you clicked on this video wanting to hear me rant about it and are probably tired with all this preamble, I think I should just get to the point already. Let's talk about how Mario Party Superstars ruined Horrorland. At least in my opinion, which you're totally fine to disagree with. Alright, so before I begin ranting about this board, I want to quickly give my opinion on the original version. I actually really liked Horrorland in Mario Party 2. Granted, I don't think it's quite as good as everyone says it is, but I still like the idea behind the whole day and night mechanic. In fact, the devs must have thought the idea was cool too, considering they made an entire Mario Party game based around that gimmick. The day and night system forces you to change up your strategies based on what time of day it is, and I think it makes for some interesting gameplay. So, what happened with the Superstars version of this board that made me not like it as much? Well, it's mainly because of 3 big reasons, and I'll go into the first reason right now, the aesthetic. I can't say I'm a really big fan of ghost-themed stages in Mario games. Not only do I think that most Ghost House levels are annoying to get through, but I also don't really like how dull they can feel on top of it. Some ghost-themed stages can break free from that, but in most cases for me, they kinda don't. Horrorland and Superstars isn't an exception to this. All of the other 4 boards in this game look so vibrant and colorful, you could really feel the life that all of these other boards have in them. Okay, maybe not in, like, Peach's Birthday Cake, considering that there's only, like, 4 other living creatures in the board other than the players, but it's still fun to look at, okay? Horrorland, on the other hand, just looks so dull and lifeless. And even though there's plenty of stuff to look at in this board, like the moving instruments and the random swing set and fountain in the Boo area, it still feels really boring due to how washed out everything looks. And yes, I get that's the point, but I still feel like they could have done a bit more with Horrorland to make it look less bland. Surprisingly enough, I didn't really have any issues with how the board looked in Mario Party 2. Sure, the board was only a JPEG with 2 frames of animations, and I still think the other boards in the game look better than it, but I generally like how Horrorland looks in this game compared to Superstars. Mario Party 2's version of Horrorland looks a lot more colorful in general, plus I really like how all of the paths glow in the dark at night. It really gives a nice contrast to the much more bleak-looking day version of the board. Also, I find it funny how there's a red paint tube on the left side of the board that's squirting out what's supposed to be a stand-in for blood. Or maybe it's ketchup, I don't know, I can't tell. This detail isn't in Superstars, but I can understand why they didn't keep it. Neutering the glowing paths, on the other hand, that's a lot less understandable. Don't get me wrong, it's not that big of a deal, but it's still kinda disappointing that there isn't that much of a contrast between the 2 times of day. If you were to compare the day and night versions of the board in Superstars, there isn't that much of a big difference to me. The day version looks boring to me, and the night version is definitely a bit better, but doesn't really make that big of a jump. It's kinda just slightly better. That being said, I still like some aspects. For instance, the womps on this board actually get stopped by magic like they're supposed to, instead of just turning into stone like in the original. Well, turning into more enforced stone. I don't know what this is supposed to be. Yeah, it's a much better change. Plus, I think the music is alright. Yeah, it does just sound like ghosttrack.mp3, but it at least fits the theme well, and I think Superstars did a fine enough job adapting it. I especially like how the music slightly changes depending on what time of day it is. Also, it has to be said, but the version of the music that plays during the last 5 turns is an absolute banger. Like, they absolutely did not need to go that hard. Outside of all those few things I mentioned though, yeah, this board is still really boring to look at. I guess there are a couple of ghosts that float around during the night variant, but that isn't enough to save this board. Alright, so admittedly, the first reason as to why this board sucks might just have been kinda nitpicky. The board doesn't have enough colors to overstimulate my monkey brain enough to enjoy it, so what? I could forgive all of that if the gameplay was good, because hey, that's what makes video games fun, right? It doesn't matter how good a video game looks at the end, it only matters how fun it is to actually play. So, is Horrorland actually fun to play? Well, kinda. I mean, it's okay, I guess. But there's still enough stuff in this board to slightly piss me off anyway, so we're still continuing this video. Which brings me into the second reason why I don't enjoy playing in Horrorland and Mario Party Superstars. There's just too much waiting. Now, I know what all of you guys are going to say. But YouTuber man, waiting is an essential part of Mario Party. You have to look at what all the other players are doing and use that waiting time to plan out strategies and stuff. It just seems to me that you're bad at the video game. Well, first of all, that's kinda mean, and secondly, I don't mind the waiting when it comes to planning and player input. It's kind of a core essential part of Mario Party after all. Every single move in Mario Party can make a world of difference, so it's important to slow down and think about all of your options. I don't mind that part of the waiting process. If I did, then I wouldn't like playing Mario Party in general. So why did I bring up waiting as a big reason as to why I don't like Horrorland specifically? Yeah, it's because all of the events on the board, which aren't controllable by the players. Mario Party Superstars is a lot slower in terms of UI and navigation compared to, say, the N64 Mario Parties, and all of that time having to go through all of these events really add up. And to clarify, by events, I mean stuff like item shops, Boo, Koopa Banks, and other stuff specific to certain boards like the Seed Lottery and Peach's Birthday Cake, and the Civet Patrol in Spaceland. Junctions where you choose different paths don't really count in my opinion, since they don't take that much time to get through, and while star spaces do count, just know that they can appear in many different parts of the board unless they remain in constant spots. I'm also not really counting event spaces, considering your turn is pretty much over after you land on them. Yeah, event spaces don't count as events. I know the irony in that. Shut up. Anyway, getting back to the point, going through these events takes significantly longer than in previous Mario Party games. If you want to buy an item in Mario Party 2, you go to the item shop, select the buy an item option, pick the item, the game quickly subtracts the coins from your coin inventory, and you get the item. Not the quickest thing in the world, but it's still not that bad. In Superstars, you go to the item shop, wait for Toad to finish his jumping animation before selecting the buy an item option, pick the item, wait for a couple of seconds for the game to remove the coins from your wallet, and then wait through an animation of the player holding up the item before putting them into their pocket. Not to mention the fact that selecting an option takes a second before letting you go to the next one. This is significantly slower than how it used to be, and in all honesty, it doesn't really bother me too much in other boards, mostly because there aren't many events right next to each other in succession. In Horrorland though, there are a lot of these events throughout the whole board, and those few seconds of waiting for animations add up quickly. Now, for research, I wanted to see how many events are actually in Horrorland compared to the other boards, just to see how much more unnecessary waiting there actually is. Here's what I managed to find. In Yoshi's Tropical Island, there are 6 events. There's the item shop, the Boo, the 2 star spaces, and the 2 thwomps. Spaceland's event count is significantly larger with 11. There's an item shop, 2 boos, 2 skeleton key gates, 2 banks, 2 Stiffet patrols, 1 star space, and I also decided to add the counter at the center of the board since it also pauses the flow of the game for a bit. Peach's Birthday Cake has the least amount of events with 4, which includes the item shop, the star space, Bowser, and the Flower Lottery. Much like Spaceland, Woody Woods also has 11 events, which includes 3 item shops, 1 boo, 3 banks, 2 skeleton key gates, 1 star space, and the Monty Mole. How many events does Horrorland have? 20, which consists of 3 item shops, 3 banks, 3 boos, Big Boo, 2 skeleton key gates, the 3 womps, the 2 Mr. Eyes, Magic Koopa's house, the dance party, and the start space. If you don't want to include the womps and the skeleton key gates, since those aren't always going to interrupt gameplay, that's still 15 events that significantly break up the movement on the board, and is still more than any of the other boards. I also wanted to look at the spaces of the boards, but it turns out that most of the boards have similar amount of spaces. The Mario Party 1 boards don't have a lot of spaces, but the 2 and 3 boards do. Woody Woods having 91 spaces, Horrorland having the second highest amount of spaces with 93, and Spaceland having the most amount with 95. Not that big of a difference, honestly. Horrorland does have more events than Spaceland, which is the biggest board in the game, but it's the biggest board in the game by 2 spaces, so I'm willing to cut Horrorland a bit of slack here. Still though, Horrorland has almost twice the amount of events that Woody Woods and Spaceland have, and all of those events really add up for lost time. Since the board is so big, movement-based items are important, and that means there's going to be turns that take way longer than they need to be. The stretch leading from the top left of the board from the bottom right is especially brutal. There's Mr. I practically right next to Magic Koopa's house at the top left, an item shop and a bank practically right next to each other at the right of the board, and 2 more events between those 2 as well. 2 out of the 7 star spaces can also spawn up there, so there's a good chance that there will be another event in the way too. I want to make it clear that I know there's so many events because of how complex the board is, and I understand that, but the complexities are what makes the waiting time so long in the first place. This also wasn't even that big of a problem in Mario Party 2, since, like I said before, the menus in the game were a lot quicker to get through. You still had to sit through stuff like Mr. I appearing and disappearing, but it's nearly not as bad as how it is in Superstars. The slower UI compared to the other Mario Party games is normally something that I'm not too bothered by, and that's because other boards don't have enough stuff to break up the pace. Horrorland, on the other hand, does have enough pace-breaking events, and so I can say that it's really the only board in the game where the issue bothers me. I also want to reiterate that I'm fine with the players planning out their moves and slowing things down, as that's just a part of how Mario Party works. All of the events I mentioned earlier, though, have no effect by the player. They just kinda happen. And yes, I know you can increase text speed to make things go faster, and while that does help a little, I still think it takes too long to get through these events anyway. Still though, all of the things I mentioned so far are pretty much just small annoyances. Me not liking the aesthetics of the board is just a preference thing, and the waiting times probably aren't a problem for most people. These things still make the board worse overall for me, and I prefer how things were done in Mario Party 2 more than how they're done here, but nothing I've talked about really affects the gameplay of the board itself. And that brings me to my third issue with Horrorland and Superstars. Listen guys, I don't mean to get political here, but inflation has kind of ruined Horrorland and Mario Party Superstars. If you're not aware of how the coin economy is in Mario Party as of now, well, it could definitely be better. Coins in Mario Party can be gotten from many different things, landing on blue spaces, winning minigames, etc. You probably know how Mario Party works. And you can use those coins to buy stuff like stars, and the more important thing for this particular point, stealing stars from other players with Boo. Now, in previous Mario Party games, there wasn't really that big of a problem with the coin economy, but starting from Super Mario Party, the coin balance got a bit worse, and that coin balance problem carries over in Superstars. Now, while the coin balance is not nearly as bad as it was in Super, seriously, why are stars 10 coins in that game, Superstars still isn't in top shape with the coin economy either. When winning minigames, both second and third place get coins along with first place, and while second and third don't get many coins, it can still be enough to make a difference. Lucky minigames exist every 5 turns too, which double coin amounts, and it can be pretty disrupting, especially since Superstars has a lot of coin minigames filling up the roster, which are minigames that can normally give you more coins than the standard 10. There are 9 coin minigames out of the 96 that can appear in party mode, which doesn't sound like a lot, but since minigames are separated by 3 types, they can appear often in the minigame wheel. Other Mario Party games before this typically only had 3 coin minigames, 1 per type. In fact, Mario Party 2 even followed this rule, so compared to the other games, 9 coin minigames feel like a lot in comparison. In fact, all of the Mario Party 3 coin minigames appear in Superstars. And of course, you can't talk about coin imbalance in Superstars without mentioning lucky spaces, which are really common in many of the boards in this game, and either give you coins, items, or cut prices for other stuff like stars, or the Thwomp tools on Yoshi's Tropical Island, but we're not talking about that last one. All of these coin inflation issues are definitely problems, and I do think that they could be better, but I honestly don't really have many issues with them in most boards of this game. In fact, the coin inflation can make certain board elements more fun, like the Thwomps in Tropical Island or the Bowser Beam in Spaceland. And with Birthday Cake and Woody Woods, I don't know, they just sort of exist, I guess. So yeah, the coin issues aren't really that bad for most boards. I don't need to say anything, you already know what the punchline is. Horrorland is where this issue is at its worst. Horrorland's gimmick is, well, the day and night system, but it also has the most boos out of any board in the game. There's 2 boos along this pathway, who only appear during the night. There's 1 boo at the bottom left of the board behind the Skeleton Key Gate, who only appears during the day. And there's King Boo on the top right. Because of the coin economy in Superstars being the way that it is, players can get a ton of coins very quickly, which means that it's mostly impossible to actually keep a lead on this board, because if you're playing with people with actual brains and not CPUs, they can just go to the booze and steal your stars. Mario Party 2 didn't have this issue because the coin economy in that game is a lot better than in Superstars. There's no lucky spaces, no coins getting awarded to second and third place, and there aren't many of the other issues that I mentioned earlier. Stealing stars are a lot more situational on that version of the board, because since you didn't earn that many coins originally, you really had to consider if going for boo is worth it. Horrorland in Mario Party 2 was a board that, in my opinion, really worked with the limitations that Mario Party 2 had, such as the lesser coin economy and the fact that you only had one item slot. In most other games, all of the features of the board wouldn't really work as well due to how Mario Party 2 actually worked. Mario Party Superstars is unfortunately one of the most other games. You could get a lot of coins way faster than in Mario Party 2, which means that going for boo is usually just the correct play. Granted, you still kinda have to consider if boo is worth it in some cases, and you also have to go out of your way to get to the boos in the first place depending on what time of day it is on the board. But, come on, if the option is there, more often than not, it's better to just do it. Oh yeah, and boos also don't require a 5 coin fee to actually steal coins in this game, unlike in 2, so that also contributes to the coin issues a little bit. All of this is also amplified by the fact that there are a lot of lucky spaces on this board in particular. Horrorland has 24 lucky spaces, which is the most number of lucky spaces on a board in Superstars, and is also significantly higher than Spaceland's lucky space count, which is 15. Need I remind you that Spaceland is bigger than Horrorland in terms of spaces, and Horrorland still has 9 more lucky spaces than it. If anything, Horrorland should have the least amount of lucky spaces because of its gimmicks, not the most. Also, unrelated, but Mr. I cost 3 or 6 coins in this game compared to Mario Party 2, where he costed 5 or 10 coins. Not that big of a difference, but it's still kinda disappointing in my opinion. However, that's still not as disappointing as King Boo. If you're not aware of how King Boo works on this board, he exists on the top right, and in order to get to him, you need a skeleton key, and you also need it to be nighttime. Once you get to King Boo, you can either steal every other player's coins for free, or you can steal a star from every other player for a whopping 150 coins. The 150 coin price is very steep, and it's very hard to actually utilize King Boo at all because of that, along with all of the other requirements. Or at least that would be the case in the original version of this board. I don't know about you, but I've very rarely seen a 20-turn game of Horrorland in this game where someone didn't have at least 100 coins at some point. It was really hard to even reach that amount in a 20-turn game of Horrorland in Mario Party 2, but in Superstars, it's actually pretty common. What this means is that King Boo gets a lot more uses in Superstars than in Mario Party 2, and in my opinion, that kinda takes away from what made King Boo special in the first place. In Mario Party 2, King Boo, or Big Boo as he was referred to in that game, was kind of a last resort play. He was something that you would never even think to use unless you were so far behind that you literally had to, and that was because getting 150 coins in Mario Party 2 was pretty rare, all things considered. In Superstars, however, you pretty much have to always be alert for when a player gets enough coins for King Boo, and it's something that has to be taken into consideration at all times rather than in very rare instances. I can see how this could be better for some people, but I personally preferred how it worked originally rather than how it works now. Also, keep in mind that just getting the King Boo is supposed to be a hassle. In Mario Party 2, you could only have one item in your inventory, which kinda sucked in that game for the most part, but it worked in Horrorland because it actually made getting to Big Boo a lot harder. Since you could only have one inventory slot, that meant that you had to trek all the way to Big Boo with only a skeleton key, with no movement items to make it faster. In Superstars, though, you can have 3 items at a time, which is usually much more preferred, but not in Horrorland since you could easily just get to King Boo with a movement item and a skeleton key, taking away from how difficult it is to get to him. Also, Big Boo in Mario Party 2 needed a fee of 15 coins to steal other people's coins, which isn't a thing anymore in Superstars. Kind of lame if you ask me. Now, I'd also be remiss if I didn't say that some of these issues can be played around. You can block people from using the boos with the Whomp, or by landing on an event space to change the time of day. King Boo can also easily be countered by the latter thing. I can definitely understand how even with all of these issues, there's also more of an emphasis on planning around them, which is definitely a fair point. But in my experience, Horrorland still kinda manages to be the same thing every time regardless, and it's also still easier for a player to bypass all of these issues than in Mario Party 2. Oh yeah, the Whomps in this game also don't move to another path when a player goes there like in the original. Not too much to complain about here, but I still liked how it worked originally. King Boo can still be easily taken care of by other players, but in turn, that also kinda removes any excitement gained from trying to use him anyway. Since King Boo is a constant threat rather than a rare threat, people are a lot more paranoid about him, which means that the game just turns back into stealing stars from people using all of the regular boos around. But King Boo can still be easily gotten anyway due to how easy it is to get coins in this game, so using him isn't even that big of a deal like it is in 2, so that means that both sides have a lame outcome. Seriously, watching a game of Horrorland and Superstars is basically the equivalent of having a sneeze that won't come out. Or Edge. The coin economy being the way that it is in Superstars doesn't work well with how Horrorland fundamentally works. It makes things too easy to do things that could be countered easier in Mario Party 2, and the economy makes it so that Horrorland plays pretty much the same way every time. And that's basically the gist of why I don't like Horrorland and Mario Party Superstars. The board is really boring to look at due to how dull everything looks, all of the menus take too long to get through because of all the events on the board, and the coin inflation really ruins the design of the board due to how easy it is to accomplish certain things. Like I said earlier, Horrorland was a board that really worked in Mario Party 2, mostly because of how the board felt like it was designed around what the game had to offer. Coins are a lot less easy to obtain into, which gives more emphasis to strategy with how to use the boos on the board. Plus, since the menus were faster in Mario Party 2, the events on the board weren't that much of a hassle. Also, it looks a lot better in Mario Party 2. I still think Horrorland and Superstars has some good elements in it. The day and night gimmick is still intact, and it can still be useful for a lot of scenarios. Plus, this board still does have a lot more planning and strategy than the other boards due to how much there is to offer. I also really like how the bonfire thing from Mario Party 2 transferred into a dance stage, but with a unique animation of one of the characters showing off some sick moves. And this board also has that awesome last 5 turns music. This board isn't the worst thing in the world to play, but it definitely feels like a shadow of its former self from Mario Party 2. In my opinion, Horrorland shouldn't have been brought back in Superstars, and I much would have preferred something else, maybe from Mario Party 3. Horrorland doesn't really work with Superstars' style of gameplay for me, and if I had to pick a version of Horrorland to actually play, I would just pick the Mario Party 2 version. Of course, this is still just my opinion. I can totally understand why you wouldn't agree with me, since I still feel like there are quite a bit of positive aspects of this board that people appreciate a lot more than I do. And maybe the stuff I mentioned about why I don't like this board doesn't bother you, or even enhances the board for you, and if that's the case, more power to you. Well, more power to the majority of you, since this board still seems to be pretty popular. I've got more Mario Party stuff planned for later, seeing as Jamboree will be releasing soon, and hopefully with less hot takes than in this video, so make sure to subscribe to not miss that. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, or leave a dislike because you hate my opinions, everyone's welcome here. And make sure to comment how much I suck at Mario Party because I can't sit through all of the text boxes. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you around. Take care. Oh yeah, and I also have another reason why Horrorland sucks in Superstars. The characters in Superstars don't wear wizard costumes like they do in the original game. 0 out of 10, worst board in the series.